cinnamony, foamy goodness. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are too. Big thanks to all you OGs who keep coming back. And if you're new to my channel, a very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody is doing very well. How is everybody's reading doing? As per Captain Obvious, we are in June. We are just about halfway through the year. I can't even believe it. But I'm here to talk to you about the books that I read in the second half of May. But before I get to that, I like to just talk to you about how things are going. It was a busy week last week. I finally took my yoga teacher exam last week. It was the most intensive, involved exam I've ever taken. The finished product ended up being about 14 pages of single space typed by me. It might as well have just asked, please tell me everything you know about yoga and everything about every single pose in English and in Sanskrit. It was very involved. And anyways, I finally got through that. It was, I would say, 3 full, solid 8-hour days of completing this exam. That took up most of last week because if I wasn't taking the exam, I was thinking about it or I was just tired from it. So I didn't get as much reading done as I normally do, but I still have books to talk to you about, of course. I also want to say that one of my recent videos, I believe it was my most recent new releases that I'm excited about videos, had many more views than my average view count. I usually have about an average of 300 to 400 views per video, and I had well over 1,000 views for this video. I don't know why. I don't understand it. I don't understand the whole YouTube algorithm. I don't really care to know about it, but I just thought it was interesting as I saw the view count and I'm like, what? And from that, I ended up getting quite a few more subscribers. So I just want to say thank you for all of the love you showed to that video and for subscribing to my channel, to the new folks specifically. I'm glad you're here and I hope you like it here. It just tickles me so much that I'm doing this thing that I never thought I would do, that I enjoy doing so much. The fact that there are so many of you out there that get that enjoyment too, it's just, it gets me in the feels, you know? The other thing I wanted to mention about one of my recent videos, and that is my most recent video before this one, I offered a giveaway as kind of a thank you for reaching 1,000 subscribers. As I mentioned in that video, I don't do this for subscribers. I don't do this for views and likes and all that kind of stuff. I will say I do love the comments. I love talking to all of you and engaging with you. That's been an absolute bonus to doing this. But just as a thank you, as an appreciation, I decided to do a very small giveaway to show you my gratitude. And if you missed that video, it was in my most recent TBR video, 5 books I'm definitely going to read. So if you missed that, go have a look, see if you're interested in the giveaway. If you are, follow the prompts, and then best of luck to all of you. Speaking of my TBR video, I just discovered yesterday that I have been selected to be a judge in the Booktube prize again. I believe it's the semifinals. So I've been assigned 6 more books to read for June and July. I'm not going to talk about those books in this video. There will be a video coming where I do talk to you about those books. However, because of that, I probably can pretty much shit can my TBR that I set for myself in June because of these 6 books that I'll be reading. What can you do? I like being a part of that community. I like being a judge for the Booktube prize. I will try to get to the 5 books that I set for myself as best as I can, but it doesn't look good. And then the final thing that I wanted to share with you, I had kind of an exciting day at work the other day. I work at an independent bookstore in downtown Savannah. Savannah itself is a very popular tourist destination. And this bookstore that I work for, it's called Shaver Booksellers. It's a very popular tourist destination. I was working the register the other day and I just happened to sell books to Henry Thomas. And I didn't realize, because I'm mostly paying attention to the books that people buy. And I always like to comment on them or just engage with the customer about the books that they're buying. And then as I was handing the bag to the customer, that's when I looked him in the eye and realized who it was, and I mean, internally, I was having a major fangirl moment, and I did let a little bit of it out. He knew the second recognition set in because I was just like, oh, hello. He smiled, he was very gracious, and I actually said, I'm having a little bit of a fangirl moment. He's like, it's okay. And I told him I saw E.T. in the theaters as a kid, and he said, oh my God, that's amazing. And even though, you know, he's done so much since then, that's, to me, he's Elliot from E.T. I mean, I was just all giddy and ridiculous, but he was super pleasant, and it was just such a fun moment for me. It was just fun. So as soon as he left, of course, I'm telling everybody, the coworkers and the owner was working in the back. I said, I just sold books to Henry Thomas. And so a couple of the girls who have worked there for a while said, yeah, we get celebrities quite frequently in here. And I'm like, who's been here? And I guess J-Lo's been in the store. Ben Affleck's been in the store. The guy from Outlander has been in there. And they mentioned a couple of other names. I said, okay, yeah, that's nice. But I just sold books to Elliot from E.T. So I thought, you guys would appreciate that as well. Anyways, let's get to the books, shall we? Okay, so end of the month, I like to do a little bit of stats, not a whole lot, but just share with you the numbers of my reading. I read a total of 12 books in the month of May, 0 DNFs, so that's always a good thing. The books that I read in the first half of the month that I covered in my mid-month wrap-up were How to Sell a Haunted House, The Bat, Sea Change, Iron Lake, Deep Hole, Basket Full of Heads, and Speak. Out of the 12 books that I read in May, I read 6 physical books and then 6 audiobooks. 5 authors were women, and I had 2 authors that were people of color. Ratings were pretty even-handed. 6 of the books were 4-star or higher, so that's good, but 3 books were 2 stars, and then the rest were right there in the middle. So the first book I'm going to talk to you about is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is a super, super popular book when it came out. It's still on the bestseller list. I listened to this book. It just became available. I've been waiting for it for several months. I'm going to tell you right now, it's worth the hype. I absolutely love this book so much. It was very well narrated on audio. If you watched my mid-month wrap-up, you know that I read Sea Change by Gina Chung. Both covers have an octopus on it. Both books feature an octopus as a character. I mentioned this in my mid-month wrap-up that anybody who read Remarkably Bright Creatures and then read Sea Change and was hoping for the same kind of dynamic as far as between the main character and the octopus, you're going to be disappointed. But I read it in reverse order, and I got what I was looking for in Sea Change in Remarkably Bright Creatures. The octopus in Remarkably Bright Creatures is named Marcellus, and he has got character and personality for days. He's a snob, he's super intelligent, and he is an absolute delight. This story follows Tova. She is in her late 60s, early 70s, I want to say, but she's pretty active. She is a widow. Her husband, Will, passed away just a couple of years ago from an illness. She's living by herself in a very small town in Washington, which is in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. She has a circle of friends, and she also works part-time at the local aquarium. And that's how she befriends Marcellus, who is the giant Pacific octopus. Tova is the cleaning lady, so she's there when most of the other employees are gone at night. And so she has the whole aquarium to herself to do her work. She becomes intrigued by Marcellus because Marcellus sneaks out of his tank on a nightly basis. And she catches him one night. Marcellus has gotten tangled up in some cords, and he is in quite a pretty dangerous position, and Tova ends up helping him and essentially saving his life. And so Marcellus and Tova kind of bond that way. As you're following Tova's story, you also find out that her son, Eric, went missing in a boating incident 30 so years ago when he was 18 years old, presumed dead. Tova has never really gotten over it. You're also following Cameron, who is a young man living in Northern California. Cameron is kind of floundering in life. He's been fired from many jobs. He can't really hold one down. His girlfriend has just broken up with him because he just doesn't have any ambition in life. He just doesn't know what he wants to do. And part of that stems from the fact that he's never known his father. He doesn't even know who he is. And then his mother has been estranged for many years because she is a drug addict. Cameron's only family is his mother's sister. I can't remember her name right now, but they're pretty close. And she helps him. She thinks the world of him. One day, Cameron finds something in, I think, his mother's belongings. He believes he has found the identity of his father. Turns out this guy is wealthy, I think, property developer, and he just so happens to live up in Tova's neck of the woods in Washington. And so Cameron decides to go on a trip and seek out his father and demand 30 years worth of child support. So the story goes from there. There are connections between Tova and Cameron, but not the connections that you think, not the connections that would seem obvious. The story is told in multiple perspectives. You have Tova's point of view, you have Cameron's point of view, and then you also have Marcellus's point of view. And it's just Marcellus's voice. If you get a chance, I'm sure it's just as delightful to read the physical book, but the audiobook is just amazing. You have, I believe, one actor who's doing all the voices except Marcellus, and then you have Marcellus who has his own specific voice, and it's just brilliant. Every single one of Marcellus's chapters starts off with him saying, day 1301 of captivity, day 1307 of captivity, and he goes from there until like one of the chapters towards the end where he's like, day 1000, oh, let's cut the shit, we don't have time. And it's just a delight. Marcellus alone is worth reading this book. And the one other thing that I just thought was laugh out loud funny, Marcellus was named by the aquarium manager's daughter, who is like 7 or 8 or whatever. She came up with Marcellus. When they decided that they were going to bring another octopus into the aquarium, the manager decided to let his daughter name her and decided to name her Pippa the Grippa. And I thought that was brilliant. If ever I am in the possession of an octopus, her name is going to be Pippa the Grippa. Absolutely love this story. This is about regular family. This is about found family. This is about forgiveness. This is about connection and grief. Explores all of that in just such a beautiful way. I did tear up at the end. The ending was completely satisfying. The book was perfect for me, absolutely perfect. I gave Remarkably Bright Creatures 5 stars. The next book I read is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This, of course, is the beloved author that wrote Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland. I absolutely love those books. This is an arc that I got from work. That's one of the many benefits I have at working at a bookstore is I have access to many, many arcs, and this was one of them. I couldn't believe my luck. This comes out June 6th. I really, really enjoyed this book. This is a mystery thriller, and this takes place in Sharon County, Virginia. I've noticed that all of S.A. Cosby's books take place in Virginia. I believe that's where S.A. Cosby is from. This follows Titus Crown. Titus was an FBI agent, I want to say in Indiana, for many, many years, and something really, really bad happens, and he ends up leaving the FBI and going back home to his small town in Sharon County. After seeing all the bigotry that was coming out of his hometown police force, he decided to run for sheriff, and he wins, which was no small feat, being that Titus is a black man in a southern county. But he's successful with his background in law enforcement and the fact that he knows everybody in town. But after a year as the town's sheriff, an incident happens where a young black man is gunned down by some of his deputies. And in investigating this shooting, they uncover a serial killer. So it ends up being like a two-tined investigation. It's an internal investigation where they are looking into the shooting of these white deputies, black shooting victim. And then in doing so, They discover some videotapes after doing a search of a house, and the videos contain some pretty disturbing images, and the content of these videos lead them to find the bodies of multiple Black children buried in a local property. There are some clues in the videos that lead them on the hunt for the serial killer, and the story goes from there. It is the same writing that you find in Razorblade Tears. It is pacey, but at the same time, it has heart. You get to know Titus. You get to know Titus's family, his relationship with his father, his relationship with his estranged brother, who has gone kind of down a different path than Titus has. You learn about the relationships that Titus has with the women in his life. So it's not just a murder mystery. It's very multidimensional. Cosby is exceptionally skilled at writing characters that just come off the page, that you expect to kind of walk into the room, and I really, really appreciate that about his writing. And then all of that coupled with this thriller where you just are dying to know who's telling the truth, who's lying. And then the other thing that I absolutely love about S.A. Cosby's writing is his writing of dialogue. Snappy, witty comebacks, sarcasm, confrontations between characters are super engaging. It's almost like, you know how you're on social media and someone says something that riles a bunch of people up, and then the only thing you want to know is the comments down below, and you spend like an hour losing time reading these comments, and you're like, oh my gosh, let me get the popcorn. That's the dialogue that you're going to read about in here. I mean, nothing's ever going to be as snappy as it was between Buddy Lee and Ike in Razorblade Tears, but still, it's very entertaining, very readable. S.A. Cosby for me has turned into that auto by author. I have now pretty much shot myself in the foot by reading an arc, because now who knows how long I will have to wait for his next book, because I've read all of his books. So anyways, I gave this 4 stars. There's a solid mystery here, and of course, all the things I said about the characters and the writing, I really, really enjoyed it. I think what the problem with it, the reason it's not 5 stars for me, is I'm holding all of S.A. Cosby's books up to the Razorblade Tears standard, and so far, none of them have met that standard. And that's not to say anything bad about the book. I really can't come up with a criticism of this book. Should I give it 5 stars? I mean, it's a high 4 stars. Solid, solid book. I definitely recommend it. I have a weird rating system. I mean, I know this. It's good to know yourself, right? It's a good book. Read it. The next book I read is Exiles by Jane Harper. This is the 3rd in the Aaron Fox series. The first was The Dry. The second one was Force of Nature. From what I understand, this is the 3rd and final in the Aaron Fox series. But I will say that this ended in such a way that I think she left an opening for herself if she wanted to write another Aaron Fox book. This one follows the story of Kim. Kim is a woman in her, I want to say, late 30s. She's the mother of 2 children, Zara, who is 17 years old, and she had Zara with her longtime love, Charlie. But she's no longer with Charlie, so they just co-parent. Kim is now married to Rowan, and she has a newborn with Rowan, Zoe. One day during an annual festival, Kim goes missing. Baby Zoe is found in her stroller by herself, and Kim is nowhere to be found. Now, Aaron just happens to be in town the day that Kim goes missing because he is really good friends with Charlie's family, and he visits them every so often. And he happens to be in town. He doesn't become part of the investigation, but he does help with the initial search. When it's finally kind of determined that Kim maybe jumped into the nearby reservoir, the case kind of goes cold. And then Aaron leaves until a year later he comes back to town to visit his friends because they're having a kind of a memorial for the day that Kim went missing, and it's kind of an appeal also for new information. So it's kind of dual purpose, memorial for Kim, but also a plea for help. She's still considered missing by her family, even though law enforcement kind of believe that, I mean, she's presumed dead. The story kind of goes from there. Aaron is asking questions and finding out different things. At the same time, he is interested in a woman that he met a year prior who runs the festival. Her name is Gemma. 4 or 5 years prior to meeting Aaron, her husband was killed in a hit-and-run accident in the same town. So it's her and her stepson, who is 15-year-old Joel. I think Joel is his name. They're still mourning, and Joel believes that the hit and run wasn't an accident. So there are certain people who are asking questions about that accident as well. And Aaron becomes intrigued because he's super interested in Gemma. So there are dual mysteries here. Are there connections between the two? Because it's a small town. This takes place in wine country in South Australia, which I just absolutely love. Specifically Jane Harper's stories. They all take place in Australia. I love stories that take place in Australia. And anyways, have these two events within a 5-year period of happening. You know, there are people that believe that they're connected somehow. And so Aaron can't help but become involved. So to follow these two stories, I thought was really, really interesting. I will say it was a little bit slow at points. Now, Jane Harper writes very, very atmospheric. I mean, you feel like you are in Australia. It just adds to the story that much more. And in this one, you're in wine country, but I felt like the atmosphere wasn't as important for this story. I mean, you definitely get a feel for what things look like. But Jane Harper also writes very character-driven type stories. I think she does a really good job of balancing character and plot. I think as I was reading it, there were parts where I felt like, okay, come on, let's get going. It felt like it dragged a little bit. However, when I got to the end and you realize what's happened, then I understood why she needed to spend so much time on certain characters and certain relationships. So I'm not sure how to adequately critique why I gave it the rating I gave it. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I read it. I'll read another Erin Falk if another one comes out. In fact, Jane Harper is another author that I will read all of her stuff. I think I am at that point where I have read all of her stuff. I think if I were to put my finger on it, because I'm having a really hard time putting my finger on it, I think there were just too many characters here, because you have Kim, her husband Rowan, you have her 2 daughters, you have her older daughter's dad, who is Charlie, and Charlie's brother, I can't remember his name, but that's who Aaron is really close with, and his wife, and their 2 children, and then there's the law enforcement. You meet a couple of guys who work in the local law enforcement. You meet a couple of Aaron's other friends, and there might have been just too many characters here. With an audiobook, which I listened to this one, if I didn't mention that before, which is narrated by an Australian person, which is fantastic. But when you're listening to an audiobook and there's so many characters, for me anyways, it's a little bit more difficult to follow, whereas if you're reading a physical book, you can kind of go back and remember who's who and who's connected to who. You know what I mean? Anyways, the story is good. I enjoyed it. If you're reading this series, of course, you're going to read Exiles, and I would recommend it. If you haven't read this series yet and you like atmospheric, character-driven, solid mysteries, because I'll tell you something, this was a solid mystery. I thought it was going to go one direction. It didn't. So it did take me by surprise, and that's always a plus when you're reading a mystery, right? I gave Exiles 3.5 stars. The next book I read was Berserker by Keanu Reeves. Also by Matt Kent, Ron Garney, and Bill Crabtree. This is volume 2. I read the first volume last month. My husband got these books. We were both kind of intrigued because they are graphic novels written by Keanu Reeves. I absolutely adore Keanu Reeves. But I will say this story, this type of story, is not really for me. My husband bought 2 volumes. I don't know if he'll buy the other volumes. I'm not sure how many there are. Whether or not he buys more volumes, I won't be reading anymore. It's just not a story for me. This basically follows B, who has been alive for thousands and thousands of years. He's immortal. I even forget how he's immortal, but he is now in present day, and he is kind of like a weapon used by the government, who has discovered that he's immortal. He can't be killed. Of course the government's going to use him, but he's trying to figure out why he's immortal and what his purpose in the world is. The artwork is stunning. I mean, I will say that. It's very detailed. It's very graphic. Lots of violence going on, but it's just really not a story that I care about. I mean, it's an immortal warrior who wants to find his purpose in life, and I just don't care. To be Perfectly fair. I only read 4 full-length novels in the last 2 weeks of the month, and I wanted to talk about more than just those 4 books, and so that's why I pick up a graphic novel sometimes. So full disclosure, this is total filler, and I'm really, really sorry. Anyways, this is the last volume that I will read in the Berserker series. I gave volume 2 2 stars. So I know I told you that it was a busy couple of weeks and I spent, all that time taking my yoga training exam. But the other reason I only read 4 full-length novels in the last 2 weeks of the month is this guy. It took me 10 solid days to read this book. This is The Last Animal by Ramona Ausubel. I was reading this book during the same time frame as I was finishing my yoga teacher exam. So in its defense, I was distracted a little bit. However, this book just didn't do it for me. I was very disappointed by this book. I expected more. Also, in its defense, I picked this book up because of the cover. I mean, it's got this beautiful, cute, adorable little baby mammoth elephant. Super cute, right? I expected it to be more about him. But at the same time, when you're reading about him, it's just so freaking sad. Anyways, let me tell you what it's about. So this is present day, if not a little bit in the future, and you're following Jane, who is a scientist, kind of a anthropological type scientist. And she is a widow. She was married to her professor for many years, and she's got 2 daughters. So Jane is a single mother struggling she hasn't gotten her PhD yet. She's still kind of working as like a lab assistant. She's working her butt off to try to come up with something that gets her published, that gets her to a point where she can be a successful scientist so that she can take care of her 2 daughters. Her 2 daughters, Eve, who at the beginning of the story is 15, and Vera, who is 13. And at the opening of the story, they're all in some Siberian ice area, kind of doing experiments with this other professor and some other science lab geeks. While Eve and Vera are off goofing off, they happen to stumble upon a buried, frozen baby mammoth. Part of this story is kind of a feminist take. The author's really exploring how, Jane is working in a male-dominated field, and she's having a hard time succeeding because any ideas that she has is either written off as nonsense, not good ideas, or if her ideas are good ones, then they're stolen by the male professor who's in charge. So anyways, they find this baby mammoth, and stuff happens, and ultimately Jane decides to steal some of its DNA. She goes to Italy to meet up with this woman who she met at this gala, who happens to run an exotic animal rescue ranch. And she just so happens to have a female elephant. And they get together and they decide to pair their respective ill-gotten goods and hopefully create a woolly mammoth. The story goes from there. So my faults with it, it's super slow. The writing is super flowery. The dialogue between the 2 sisters, most of the time, it's super entertaining and witty. I want to say that's really the only enjoyment I got out of this story is the relationship between Eve and Vera. It was realistic in that they're super sarcastic with each other. They can be nasty with each other, but they would absolutely die for each other and do anything for each other. The only thing that wasn't realistic was just some of the conversations that they had as far as how they would speak, things that they would say. Nobody talks like that. Did you ever watch Gilmore Girls? I loved Gilmore Girls, and I loved the snappy dialogue in Gilmore Girls, but nobody talks like that. Nobody is that witty and smart off the cuff like that. Nobody is. And that's how it was kind of here. Because they have a scientist as a mother, they would ramble off certain facts that just in a certain way that just wasn't realistic. And just the writing in general was super, beautiful at times, but it was too much. And then the story just kind of drags on and drags on. And finally, when you get to the point where a baby elephant is born and it is this fuzzy little thing, it is so sad. Now, for me, I'm an animal lover of all animals, but elephants just have my heart. I've spent time with elephants. I've volunteered at elephant rescue parks, and they're just amazing astonishing creatures. And so my heart is a little bit more raw when it comes to elephants. So the parts where you are seeing what's happening to this little baby elephant and you are realizing the future of this baby elephant, it was just heartbreaking. The only real point to it that I can appreciate is the fact that the baby elephant, it ended up being rejected by the mother elephant, and that was directly parallel to the struggle that even Vera had with their relationship with their mom, because their mom is so focused on her career, but in doing so, she is neglectful of her daughters. Even Vera feels that every single day. Jane finds herself completely lost in the survival of this baby woolly mammoth, and every effort that she makes to try to nurture this baby is a failure, and she knows this baby's got a really, really dour future, and she's devastated by it. And through that is how she realizes that her daughters are having these same struggles because their mother is not there for them when they need them. So that I can kind of appreciate. But most of the time reading this book, I was either bored or supremely sad. I can't really, in good conscience, recommend this book. But if any of that appeals to you, I mean, it's not a very long book. It's less than 300 pages, and it took me, I guess it was 9 days, and it took me to read this book. So I don't know. I had a hard time, and I was really disappointed and bummed. And it was a book that I should have DNF'd. To be completely honest, I was thinking of DNFing probably at 50 pages, but I wanted to find out what happened to the elephant because that's who I am. And then I was 100 pages in and I realized that I definitely should have DNF'd it. I was too deep into it, and it's a vicious cycle, people. It's a vicious cycle. That's enough about this book. I gave The Last Animal 2 stars. That is it. Those are the books that I read in the month of May. Have you read any of these books? I would love to hear your thoughts. What books did you read that you want to tell me about? Did you have any favorites that I haven't talked about yet? I would love to hear about them. Or you can just say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.